Welcome, everybody. I'm Santiago, Kneeland, and this is The Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. Today, we're going to be talking about living spiritually with the paranormal. This is an interesting topic, and it kind of goes into some of the gray areas where we do not have a lot of information revealed within the Rancho book, so a lot of it has to do with interpretation and opinions. So it's very interesting, that subject. Today's topic, it's that we're stepping into an era where many people have experienced things but almost never talks about it. It's the paranormal. Dreams that come true, visions you can't explain, encounters that challenge everything you thought you knew about reality. But this episode isn't about sensational stories. It's about something much deeper. How to stay spiritually grounded when the unexplained enters your life. Susan Lyon, my guest, has spent more than 4 decades studying the teachings of the Rancho book while navigating extraordinary experiences with calm, practical faith. Today we explore how free will, friendship with God, and a life of service can keep us centered even in a universe far stranger and more beautiful than we imagined. So welcome, Susan. It's a pleasure, as always, to have you here.
Thank you, Santiago. It's good to be here. You're
Great.
exclusively the one that gets the interview on this, nobody else.
Good, good. No, yeah, it's an interesting topic. So we're gonna go diving in into different segments. But to begin us off and to start us off to this, we're gonna talk about free will, boundaries, and friendship with God. Spiritual boundaries. Let's begin with this because it's a foundation. Because when strange or unexplained experiences enter our lives, the first question isn't what happened. It's who is in charge of your inner world. The Rancho book teaches that we are free will creatures, and that means that we have the authority over our spiritual experience. The paranormal doesn't get to run our household, and in this segment, Susan will explore how a deep friendship with God becomes the anchor that keeps us grounded, allowing us to face mystery without fear and without losing our center. So tell us about this, anchoring and this setting of boundaries within the paranormal, Susan.
Well, back in 1978, when I found the Urantia book, I I had this conversion experience. I was I felt like a born again Christian, but I
Mm-hmm.
had this powerful experience that I believe was, engaging or connecting with the spirit of truth at that point, that at a level I had never felt before.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, that was the beginning of the realization of needing to, work within for that peace and that calm. And, I was on fire to go out and share, the gospel, the Urantia book with everyone immediately. And I got a lot of pushback, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so it helped me. It was the beginning of a journey of how to manage faith and a realization that the faith religion is just a relationship with God, that it was within, that power of the spirit within maybe isn't always to be shared with others in a way that they can understand. And I think that's why I've lived all these years without really talking about a lot of this that's gone on.
Mm-hmm.
But I set the boundaries to try to share where I can, but I've kept a lot of this to myself. But good friends that we have recommended that you really, for your own best health and practices, need to confide in others that you trust, and that
Mm-hmm.
you need to share and peel back, be able to share the memory or whatever it is, that with at least a few, and it's healthier that way, that you're not holding it all within. So part of this is a journey for me personally, health wise,
Mm-hmm.
to release some of that, that I haven't shared with others, and then just like put it to rest, because some of
Well,
the stuff is, you feel, that has happened is odd. You feel it's odd, but that I still have to believe a lot of other people have shared experiences they're probably not talking about either. And if we knew how much that we're really being opened up to new understanding and expanding consciousness, we wouldn't
yeah.
fear. And that's my goal, is that to talk with you today mostly is that it's not to be feared, that there's a lot that we call paranormal that might actually be normal as we're opening up our hearts to the spirit, as we're opening up and expanding consciousness. The
Yeah.
boundaries that you asked about basically are that the relationship with God, my growth
Mm-hmm.
on terms that I feel comfortable with and safe with. I don't, go further than I feel comfortable or safe with. And it's been a growth, a gradual growth, not anything crazy or not seeking out fantastic experiences. These things just kind of happen, and you know, I take them as a normal religious
Yeah.
person and try to keep it, sane. I'm not looking for.
And we're gonna go dive into some of your experiences. You're gonna tell us about them, but I mean, just to sum up of what you're saying about setting the boundaries and confiding with God, and really trusting in God as the anchor.
Right.
That's really important. I mean, a lot of the different. I mean, nowadays, and even when I was a kid, it was interesting. My dad thought I was crazy because when the college fair used to go to my high school, I would go to I mean, to any of the booths, and it was the same as you have in the States. It was, all the U.S. colleges that showed up there, and I would ask about parapsychology because I wanted to be, a ghost investigator. So I really love the subject, and I think it's really interesting. And I one of the things that it's important to talk about, and we're going to go in there in a minute because I think it's setting boundaries. Think with people, not talking about them and keeping to yourself, and just with people that's the human, but also the setting boundaries or the setting limits with the paranormal, whatever it is that it's outside.
Mhm.
So because you see a lot of examples, and we don't have a clear definition or. I mean, we do have the evil we cannot, or the evil spirits cannot come into us, or if we do not let them, and then they cannot invade us. But then we have all the things about the exorcism and all that. So it's an interesting take on how that works. But tell us, how about setting boundaries outside, in the physical world and in the spiritual world.
Well, I think I told you before about a friend who has told me that they have like angels that will come in and, smack them
Okay.
in the head, wake them up. So get busy and work and do service stuff. And I had to say, I think that in my mind, that is a boundary that I set is in our philosophy, we kind of believe that, our thought adjuster, our indwelling spirit works with us at night, mostly when we're asleep. And so, and during the day, the angels and midwares or whoever else might contribute to our growth. And
Mm-hmm.
so in my mind, I told this friend, I said, "Hey, why would you allow that? Why would you let some, like angels or whatever come in your bedroom at night and wake you up from your sleep? There's nothing that I mean, obviously what we do or we try to do to serve is important, but we also need a good night's sleep and we need, common sense." And so I've joked with Rick before and I make sure that, they all hear. And I don't think of them as being evil or anything, but they just know that, my room at night is off limits. There's nobody that's going to come in and bother me when I'm sleeping. That's the adjuster's time. That's the time my indwelling
Yeah.
spirit to teach me or reach me, and nobody else needs to bother. And if they do want to contact me, and they haven't yet, but they need to catch me when I'm dressed, and then maybe they could
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
or something. But they need to treat me like normal. It's normal boundaries, just like we would with anybody else. It's like,
Okay.
you know, honestly, we live in an age when we don't see them. But in future ages, we're told the vision is expands and we're more aware of them being around. We know spirits are around, we know angels are around, but we're
Yeah.
we're guarded from seeing them so we can live a normal life and relax. Because, if we saw them all
Exactly.
around and we knew we were being watched every minute, we wouldn't feel comfortable with that. I don't know how well
No,
we would do it.
definitely.
Right. So I treat them just like, okay, we know you're there, but there are boundaries. And this is my religious experience with the Father. And I'm empowered by the Spirit of truth. That's my, companion, my Jesus, my Holy Spirit, the Mother Spirit is those are my trio of constant companions. And the rest, they work for me, but that doesn't mean they have right to come in my room and wake me up at night. That's not
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah, and I think I mean in your case it's I mean you're talking about good spirits, that you're
Right.
just setting boundaries, and but a lot of people that might not have your spiritual progress or evolution or your stage might fall into letting other spirits, other agencies, come into their life. So how it's important to always keep centering, like you said, going to the thought adjuster, which is that's really your guide, that's really your compass inside, and it's you're never spiritually alone, even in the strangest moments, and it's really being there, using that guide, and knowing that you have your space, you have your autonomy, and nothing can invade. Not even God can go and change your mind, or go and do that. So no other being can invade your space. Let's
I
call it
yeah,
that way.
I feel you're right about that, and I would even call it a safe space because I'm not progressive or anything like
No.
that spiritually, but I 100% believe I'm safe from evil spirits because
Yeah.
I believe that that trio of spirit beings that we just talked about give me that shield of safety, give me that
Yeah.
protection. That you have to remember anyone that's an evil spirit, that is a rebel spirit, doesn't have an indwelling spirit of God like we do.
Yeah.
I don't believe, unless you would invite that, that they could possibly approach us even. So, I feel we're safe.
Yeah.
Others
Yeah.
might not have that confidence, but I do have that confidence.
That's very
100%.
important. That's very
Yeah.
important, and that's always. I mean, keeping and evil at bay. That's always important. So, Susan, one of the things that I mean, that's part of the interesting part of this conversation is what kind of activities did you go through where that you realized that you were having that others weren't, and what was your first instinct? What happened? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, let me first say that one of the first experiences I ever had was more a realization of experiences I was having that most other people have. And that
Hmm.
was my first real recognized instance of deja vu, what we would call deja vu,
Okay.
precognition. And that was in eighth grade. And I don't have anything I really remember before that, but I walked into a classroom and a substitute teacher was there in the place of a favorite teacher who had gone out sick. And I remember it being shocked to see, someone different there, concerned. But at the same time, I had this overwhelming feeling that I had seen it before or lived it before. You know how you feel with deja vu? It's like wham, you get this feeling that you know you've been there before. Well,
Yeah.
obviously you haven't. You know that, so you know you've seen it somehow before. And I really believe that when you're asleep, we're in the Urantia book philosophy, it teaches us that with spirit, mind can transcend time. And so I
Okay.
believe that a lot of what we might call a dream is really a glimpse of maybe the super consciousness that we're not aware of. That
Definitely.
and the indwelling spirit is eternal, has no time boundaries. And so the eternal spirit, that fragment of God that lives within us, knows the past, the present, and the future.
Yeah.
And so, for one glimpse, if they've made contact, you might have seen something from the future. And that is what I believe everyone shares. I mean, I don't know anybody that has never had a deja vu experience. Just a brief blink of time that you think, I feel this is familiar. I've seen this before. And so that's my shared thing where I almost think it's proof of the indwelling spirit, because without that spirit, we couldn't see the future. Our mind couldn't do that.
That's interesting to that theory, and I like it because yeah, definitely. I mean, if we're talking about that spirit lives within perfection in a timeless universe, then it makes sense that if we're making contact, you get these glimpses of perfection where there's no time, and you get those glimpses of both the future and the past. And I have had couple of more than a couple of experiences of dreams that really come true. They don't come true, exactly how you dream them, because even dreams are always kind of crazy. But meeting a certain person, some
Mhm.
certain things happening exactly, I mean that name, that situation, that person. I mean, it's not. I mean, beyond a coincidence. It's just that, and it's and it was recently that I kind of mapped out and maybe two or three of them really were transcendental to my life. It was meeting someone that actually, that person, I saw the sequence, got me to introduce me to where eventually I got to get to know about the Rancher book. So see that sequence within your dreams. And I think it's maybe it's something that it's intentional, and it's not just something accidental, that they want you to get that imprint so that you can have that as a something in your mind. And sometimes you maybe you don't forget. I mean, you dream about it, but suddenly when it happens, it just comes all back to to life.
Right. It's funny that you usually forget those, usually,
Yeah.
until, or in my case anyway, until it actually happens. And then you get that feeling of, okay, I know you recognize that you've seen it before. Because a lot of times it happens with the same words, the same situation, the same room, the same person, the same everything matches exactly what you've seen before. And then
Yeah.
you know it's been a preview. You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's like a hidden truth or hidden information there that just pops up. So it's a interesting situation. So
Yeah.
let's before we continue with the rest of your experiences, we're gonna end this segment here and keep watching for the rest of the paranormal situations that Susan has experienced and the explanation she has for them. Now we move into Susan's extraordinary experiences. Precognitive dreams, walking visions, and moments that seem to defy logic. But what makes these stories powerful isn't mystery itself, it's what she does next. Again and again, Susan turns unexplained experiences into practical acts of love, warning someone in danger, making a phone call, helping someone in need. And in this segment, we'll explore a powerful spiritual principle that true religion isn't about chasing mystical experiences, it's about how we respond to life. So, Susan, tell us more of your experiences. I mean, we were just talking about the deja vu and how dreams can be a glimpse into the future, these instances where we connect with spirit. So, what other situations have you experienced and what explanations? Because I think they're great.
Well, um, first of all, let's do a fun one. Let's do a happy one.
Okay.
I actually had the precognition of um, a couple of different times of grandkids being born in my family. I actually
Okay.
saw the baby born before it was born, and before anyone was expecting, to be honest. And I'm still waiting on one that I've seen that hasn't been born yet. But it was like, one of my granddaughters. I saw that she's going to have a little girl. She's not married yet, so that's still to come. But it's one of those things that I have these pending ones that I know are going to happen, because two of my grandchildren that were born, I saw before they were born. and I knew exactly what they were going to look like as babies when they were born. I mean, not all babies look alike, but as they were growing up, I knew
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
it would be like. And so that was kind of fun. So let's put that aside. But one of the things I would say about the dreams, as far as the past goes, um, the drowning of the little girl drowning in the lake by my house. I
Okay.
saw the vision of this little girl. I could tell it was a little girl, little child in the water, under the water, lifeless, and much, the reeds and stuff around her. And I
Okay.
knew exactly that it was right at the corner of my lot where there was um, a drainage pipe, I guess you would say, that drained the lake off into another area, evidently. But anyway, I saw the little child there, and it wigged me out. It really did bother me because I thought, oh my gosh, not on my watch. My grandkids are not gonna get near the water unless I'm holding their hand, and so whenever they would be over and they'd be playing, they never were unwatched. I was always outside making sure, and they knew you don't go this any closer than this. There was a tree back there, so you never go beyond the tree toward the water unless
Mm-hmm.
Nani's holding your hand and I'm with you,
Yeah.
and that was the rule. And so several years went by, and I was working a job with a lady who was our HR manager, and she came to me one time and she said, like, Susan, you're so lucky that you live so close to work, because I live just a few blocks from work. She said,
Mm-hmm.
you're so lucky, I'm running late today, but you're here in a couple of minutes, right? And I'm like, yeah. And I hadn't known this before, but I had this dream, and it always worried me. And she said, my cousin used to live over there in in your spot where I bought a mobile home, a new mobile home, and had it
Mm-hmm.
moved, chose the lot, and didn't know anything about it or about the history of it or anything. I bought the new home and I moved it in. It was an empty
Mm-hmm.
lot available. And so she's like, I don't know if you know this or not, but my cousin used to live over there in the spot where you moved your house. And her
Okay.
daughter drowned in the lake there. So it was so crazy because then the connection was
So it
made
was in the exact spot where you were,
where I moved my house. Yeah, she had
and
lived
you
there.
knew the person, so you had a relationship with the
Yeah,
person.
she was
So
my HR manager, but I had never known that she had a cousin
yeah,
that had
yeah, yeah. The
well, so
connection
all of
wasn't.
that was unknown. So that was just the experience, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I had this dream about this little girl, and I've always worried about my grandkids, being near the water." And she's like, "Yeah, she lost her daughter there, and then she, of course, moved away.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. And I mean, now that you're mentioning that, and a little bit of what I liked to study, when I was a kid, you know, and this is not from the Urantia book, the what happens with your soul and with your spirit when I mean, with your personality, with yourself when you evolve. But there's some charges, there's some energetic charges. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like the residue, the energetic residue, but I remember that, you always have the different types of ghosts, and we're gonna go, talk about ghost stories and these energies. Let's say they have a tendency to either fixate to a person or fixate. I mean, there's other two, but the main two is to a person, to situation, so they relive a situation. Those are the ones that you find like in a highway, you know, or a place, a situation. And this is like a house, and this is something like a drowning. That is something that was a situation. So this is something that, there's a probably like an imprint in the energy, in time, time and space, that is just there. I don't know if it's the actual person, the actual spirit, and that communicated. Of course not. I don't know, but I don't know what's your take on that, Susan.
I've questioned that myself. We don't have all the answers, but I've also wondered if there is some kind of attachment to locations of
Hmm.
the imprint of the energy of what happened there.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
I know there, I don't believe in ghosts. I believe, people have gone on to be resurrected and they're not here. But I do believe there's something there. And that dream that I had, I believe it was connecting to the inner spirit. That wasn't precognition because it's something that
Yeah,
already,
yeah, no, no, yeah.
that was actually a vision of the past. And of course, the adjuster is timeless. So somehow I caught that.
Yeah, the maybe the
Glimpse.
like we were saying, and we both agree, I mean, it's something that, just from this conversation, I realized that we both agree on this is that, there's this imprint, and especially when something is traumatic,
Mhm.
you know, I'm going to tell you, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit more about your stories, but let me tell you this story. And I've always realized, and I've always, not just in my situations, but seen and heard of a lot of people tell you the same thing that right after somebody dies, they are visited by the person, they have the spirit of the person visit them. So there was one instance in Mexico, with my oldest daughter. She was probably probably 6 years old, 7 years old, around there. Yeah, probably 6, 7 years old. And the person that used to help us in our house died in an operation, and it was very sad because I mean a very tragic story. She went into for surgery, and she died right after the procedure, kind of day after. And this was at the middle of the night. This was 4 in the morning, and my wife gets a call. You get those calls in the middle of the morning, and it was their
Oh,
children, this lady's kids, calling my wife, telling her. And we come out, and my daughter's in our room. My other son was very young. I mean, he was probably 1 or 2. We go outside of the room, and where she said at the phone, and she starts crying, and she tells me that the lady just died. And then suddenly my daughter screams, and we run into the room, and she says that the lady was there with her, and at that exact time. It was just moments after she passed. So I mean, this isn't coincidence, and this isn't the only time that I've had similar things happen. What's your take on that?
actually, I was raised on a story like that from my grandma. She had an
Okay.
experience similar to that. Where she had heard a knock at the door and no one was there. She did it a couple of different times. And then the third time she had heard her uncle call her name and knock at the door and she went and there was no one there, but she got a telegram that he had passed away. So it's kind of a weird timing like that too. And I always I always think, the angels are they're in charge of your soul and all of that when you die. And I almost wonder if sometimes the angels are involved in appearances like that, that they might be able to project themselves as or give the impression of the person, just to be a comfort in some way. And I don't know what their goal is, but
Or
sometimes it
maybe
is.
you have maybe you
Yeah,
have like a goodbye a message for certain people. You
right.
have and they just go and broadcast that, like a hologram. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, sometimes people say they smell a favorite fragrance that they associate with someone, or you
and
know,
it's usually saying goodbye. A lot of them is they came to say goodbye. That's what they say.
yeah, you're cared for by that person. And my
Yeah.
grandma felt that way about her uncle. It was a favorite uncle, and she felt like that was it took the shock away from the news that he had passed because she was already
Okay.
thinking, he was at the door knocking and had called her name. Anyway, yeah, that's a little bit of that, but yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of
Yeah.
people have experiences and we can't maybe explain it, but we know, you can't say what's real to someone else any more
Yeah.
than,
Definitely.
we only know our own experience. A lot of people have experienced things like that.
Definitely, definitely. Well, it's
Yeah.
it's it's in the experiences, I think, that you find more answers. So tell us more of your experiences. I mean, if you have more on the precognitive dreams, and before we go into the walking visions that you also have, but do you have other of these dreams that you've had?
Well, I will give you an example of another thing. And, a lot of times these reactions you're talking about are based on previous experiences that maybe have taught us what to do or whatever. This is an example of that I'm going to tell you about. My husband actually was wakened from sleep on a Saturday evening
Mm-hmm.
and woke up from a dream and he was crying. And he said he had the sense that the neighbor lady was coming to him, trying to get him to help his dad because his dad was sick, which was my father in law.
Mm-hmm.
So, I tried to say, it's a dream. Don't worry. It's a dream. His father was fine. His father was healthy. He had just retired and was enjoying, the first year of his retirement, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, let's go back to sleep. This was like early in the morning hours. And so we went back to sleep, and it was like an hour later, he woke up with the same dream again. And it really shook him because he thought, and this is a tough guy, he was a tough guy. Um, and he was like, no, this is real. Something's going on here. And I, it happened a third time. I said, let's go to sleep. There's no reason to get upset about it.
Yeah.
And so the third time it happened, then he felt convinced that something he needed to do something to help his dad. And knowing his dad, I said, what are you going to do? What are you going to say to your dad? Dad, I had a
Yeah.
dream. You need to go to the doctor. And his dad was, he was a tough guy too. He was like, I feel fine. No,
Yeah.
well, I
Quit your
said, what?
mumbo jumbo,
Right,
your crazy stuff. Yeah.
right, right. And so I basically have the guilt of talking him out of asking his
Okay.
dad to go to the doctor. And um, it was exactly a week later on a Saturday in the middle of the night, the phone rang and we knew. We knew before we even answered the phone that his dad had died.
Really.
And that was the call that his dad had passed away from a heart attack. So later, when his wife, my mother-in-law, I
Uh-huh.
was brushing my teeth in the morning, totally not even thinking about her, just starting my day, brushing my teeth in the mirror, brushing my teeth. And all of a sudden, I get a picture. And by the way, I should, set this up. She was a beautiful woman, very glamorous. And my kids are all beautiful like her. And she always was fixing up. And they had their 35th anniversary, and I made her a beautiful corsage to wear for their special picture that they were going to have taken. And she told me, she goes, Susie, make sure that I've got my corsage, on. I've got all my grave clothes laid out, my jewelry I want, my corsage, my
Yeah.
kid's beautiful gown ready. And so I had seen it. She showed it to me. And so I'm brushing my teeth, and all of a sudden in the mirror, instead of my face, there flashes this image of her dead in her grave clothes with the corsage on, the whole bit.
Really.
Totally recognizable from everything she had shown me before. And I instantly just cried. I had the sense, okay, she's dead. When I knew she hadn't been dead, obviously. So my first reaction was it shook me up, And I thought, well, I have to do something because we didn't do something before and his father passed away. I have to do something now, to
Mm-hmm.
help her. So I called her up and I said, Mom, or how are you feeling? How are you doing? And she's like, I feel a little weird, but I'm okay. I said, because and she was a big believer in dreams. She'd get the book,
Okay.
Interpret Dreams and all that. I don't know how successful that all was. And I don't do that myself, but I figure if a dream is garbled, I usually forget them anyway, but I figure if I'm meant to know, I'm going to know. I don't
Yeah.
need to look in a book. Anyway, but she believed in that. And I said, Mom, I had a dream and I want you to I want you to go and get an opinion from the doctor. I want you to get checked out because I had a dream that that you might be sick or something. I want to get
Yeah. Yeah.
that opinion, just that you're okay." And she's, "Well, I do feel a little weird." And so we called her doctor, and they gave us a little bit of trouble about it because she didn't have an appointment. And I said, I have to insist." She was on heart medication. I said, "Then let's get her to the heart doctor. Let's get a second opinion. That's
Yeah.
a good
Yeah.
idea, you know." And they said, "Well, we can't do it without a referral from the doctor." So had to call back to the doctor, and they gave us a hassle. And I said, "Listen, I'm going to be down there in 15 minutes for that referral. I want it written out when I get there and ready to go." And I don't know where all that came from, but it was like, it was either get her in or I felt like she was going to be dead.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it kind of brought out a new gear in me. I don't know. I just said it.
Yeah.
And
You
then
were determined to get that done, of
yeah,
course.
so I got it, the paper, and I called the other doctor. I said, "We're on our way." So I got her in, and the heart doctor, called an ambulance for her to be taken immediately to the hospital from his office. And he is the one that took over from there. And he found out over the next few days, well, she had kidney failure. And
Really.
he said she wouldn't have lived another 24 hours.
Really? So that was, oh God,
Mm.
that's very interesting, Susan.
And it was all the medicines that she had been prescribed that were not working well with each other that had caused this kidney failure.
Yeah, they can really mess you up, of course.
Yeah. And so it got all straightened out, and she lived for years after that. But when I told her the story about it, of course, she was glad that, at the time, though, it was awkward because she was like, "Why are you making such a fuss?"
Yeah, yeah, of course. But definitely, definitely. I mean, it's always trusting that sixth sense. I mean, if and even that sixth sense, if it's so clear, you have to act on it. And glad that you did. That really saved her life. I mean, that's so important. Before we close this segment, I have another story. And this one is, I think, I don't know if I talked about this with you. It was what happened on the eve of 9/11.
Yeah.
I was in the US. I was in San Antonio, Texas, actually, and I was sleeping in the couch, right in front of the TV. Back in the day, I think it wasn't flat screen. It was, the big old TVs. Remember, I watched the football game that night. It was Monday night, New York against Denver. I remember that. So, anyways, long story short, I turned off the TV and I went to sleep. And I remember around in between 1 or 2 in the morning, I got up and I was with such fear. I was overcome with fear and panic. When like the kind of fear when you're a kid, that's really there's no, it's irrational, that you run to your parents' room. I remember going to the kitchen and looking at the skyline of San Antonio, really scared. And it was like, and this is what I felt like the devil was loose. That's what I felt. So the next day, I remember because I was watching the game. I had that channel on, and right in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 in the morning, put on the TV. It was central, so I don't remember the exact time. Put on the TV, and you had the tower, just one of them on fire. So interesting, how you can get these precognitive glimpses, as you say.
Yeah. Some people refer to that as a premonition.
Yeah,
Well, definitely, there was something there that was letting you know that there was about something to happen. That was
definitely. And here we finally zoom out into the biggest frame of all, the cosmic one. The Urantia book describes a universe filled with life, purpose, and divine administration, where Earth occupies a unique and unusual place in cosmic history. In this segment, we explore how a broader cosmic perspective can transform fear into meaning. Because when you understand that you live in a living universe guided by divine love, even the strangest experiences begin to look like less chaos and more like part of a much larger story. So, how can you put all this together? How is this all woven into the cosmic picture?
well, our philosophy from the Urantia book tells us about not only the spirit realm of, a busy spiritual universe, but that there is life in other planets too, that we're not alone. So it helps expand our framework of consciousness to include a big universe, a friendly universe. Um, and that feels safe to me. That feels good to know
Yeah.
that we're not just living in chaos, but we're just happen to be in a little spot of trouble in a whole big friendly universe. And so that gives us a sense of safety and grounding too. And I think that guides pretty much our whole life, um, whatever happens. That's something that I think goes back even to the days of the Bible when we're told that Cain was afraid to go into another land because he didn't have that tribal mark or something to
Yeah.
keep him safe, that they would recognize that, and we're told in the Urantia book that he gets his indwelling spirit. And that knowledge, that sense of confidence or power or spiritual power that comes with that, people recognized and they feared. Now, there should be no fear, but it's still, there's a certain strength that comes from that knowing of that God is with you that I think other people can notice. And that is part of what um, everyone wants, this age of disclosure. And I think we've already begun disclosure a long time
Yeah.
ago. The disclosure is opening up to the spirit and the power, the strength that comes with living with God like that, and accepting new experiences that we know are going to come our way in this life, in the universe. So it's a grounding, that faith. It's not just religion as people know it. It's a confidence that comes with knowing you're with God.
Yeah, the confidence yeah, I think I don't know if you can say faith. It is faith, but it's undoubtful faith. I mean, you can cross anything, even if you don't know what's going on. And that's the thing. Many times, you don't know what's on the other side, but you just have to have that faith and put that action. And again, I mentioned Peterson a lot. I like what he says, that you have to have that faith, but you have to have that action as well. Not
Mm.
just wishing or, you know, putting your mind to it and letting the universe work for you, but putting your effort in trying to achieve that. If you want to have a better job, then you have to get better at skills. Have to learn. You have to get educated. You have to do this, that, and that. Can't just sit still. I can expect things to happen. That's the important thing, that you do things. So, so
That's
really,
exactly.
that's yeah, it's putting things into motion, into action. But there is still some other instances that I want to cover about, other paranormal experiences that you've had in your life. And I think there's an experience with your son with an Easter bunny.
Well, that sounds strange in the first place, doesn't it? Um,
Yes.
I know. That's part of the reason that I talked about it a lot. But my son was almost 5 years old. He was a month or so away from being 5 years old when I had this incident. It was a week before Easter, and he's the youngest of my four kids. I have three daughters that are older. So he was the last one to, leave in the Easter bunny basically. And
Hmm.
and one of those parents that, let the stories be fun and, the Santa
Yeah.
Claus, the Easter bunny, the Tooth Fairy and all of that, as long as they
As
were
long as
enjoying,
they can, as long as they last, of course.
as
Yeah.
long as they were enjoying it. Yeah. So he wasn't in school yet, he hadn't started kindergarten yet. And so there was no need to wake him up or anything. So I was in the kitchen getting breakfast ready for the girls, because they had to get off to school. And he came into the kitchen and was crying. And first thing in the morning, and I thought, what had happened, and was crying and blinking real repeatedly and couldn't stop. And so I was like, what's wrong, honey? And he's like, the Easter bunny came and scared me, and I said, well, honey, you know. you know, it wasn't Easter yet.
Yeah.
I said, it's the Easter bunny. It's not time for the Easter bunny.
Yeah.
And he said, but he came, he scared me. And I said, well, sweetie, the Easter bunny doesn't come for another week. So, and I said, you must have had a dream. You must have had a dream. And he said, it wasn't a dream. And he was pretty upset about it. He's like, it wasn't a dream. And I said,
Okay.
well, maybe you saw something else that scared you. I said, did you see something move? You think a shadow moved, or did you, we had a blow up Easter bunny in the hall by the kitchen. I said, did you maybe see that? And because it was pink, it was big. I said, did you maybe see that in the darkness or something? And could it have been? He's like, no, mommy, it wasn't. No, you know. And he said, I said, well, can you tell me what it looked like? And he was, since he had been little, he had seemed to enjoy drawing with crayons and stuff. He started with little
Okay.
circles. He was in the high chair, and I have art history, so I remember one of my art teachers always said, "Give them plain paper and let them go, and they'll you'll encourage their art." So that's what I did with him. The other kids didn't enjoy it so
Yeah,
much.
that
Well,
wasn't their thing. Yeah.
that wasn't your thing, but they could draw a little, but he really loved it. And he could sit there for a couple hours and, he started making
Yeah.
things with little antlers and hands and faces and all. By the time he was that age that this happened, he was drawing pretty well. And I said, well, honey, can you show me? Because I've never seen the Easter Bunny. I was always a good girl and stayed asleep, when the Easter Bunny was supposed to come. I don't know
Yeah,
even what
yeah,
the Easter
yeah,
Bunny's
yeah.
supposed to look like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Well,
exactly.
I didn't say a good girl, but, I didn't want him to feel like he was bad or anything, but I said I was always asleep,
Yeah,
I never
yeah. That's
saw
something
the
that
Easter
doesn't
Bunny.
happen to
Might as
you.
well try to maintain the Easter Bunny story, and talk him
I
out of
think
it,
it's easier to see Santa Claus than to see the Easter Bunny, right? I don't know a
Yeah.
lot of stories about the Easter Bunny actually. But anyway, so this is interesting. So what happened?
So I said, "Can you draw a picture of what you saw for mommy so I can tell what you saw?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'll try," So I gave him paper, I gave him the pen, and he drew this picture, and it didn't look like an Easter bunny, obviously. It looked like an alien. And I didn't use that word, but and he had never really seen, I was pretty careful about what I let my kids see that could have been scary on TV or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I really didn't know the word. And when he drew that, I said, "Well, first of all, that's not the Easter bunny. But I want to tell you something so you don't worry because, honey, the doors are locked. Nobody's coming in the house. Daddy would get them if they did, That isn't the Easter bunny, and I've gotta tell you the truth about the Easter bunny, that I'm mommy's the one that makes the baskets for you and puts the candy in. Nobody's coming in our house. It's time that you're a grown-up boy now, I'm gonna tell you. It's a story, it's a fun story for little children to believe, but nobody's coming in our house. Nobody came in our house, and the doors are locked." And he said, "Well, something was in the house. The Easter bunny was in the house, mommy." And he was determined. And all this time he's blinking and he's upset. You can see. And I said, "Well, I don't want you to think I don't believe you because I'm listening to you. I think it must have been a dream that just seemed very, very real. But, let's don't worry about it, mommy. I will make sure nothing can get in the house." And he said, "Well, I don't want the Easter bunny to come and I don't want the candy. I don't want his candy." So he was really, it's this little child and telling me they don't even want their Easter candy, and I
Yeah,
said, "Well,
yeah. It made a big impression.
see, I
What
really,
was it?
he was determined that he did not want the Easter bunny to come back or to come at all." Anyway, so, as time went on, time went by and he was pretty sensitive about it. He continued the blinking. I took him to the pediatrician and I said, "Listen, he's I don't know what has happened, but something scared him." And he woke up and he had this blinking tick and he thinks he saw something at night that scared him. he's calling it the Easter Bunny. Obviously, it's not, you know. And he said, "Well, I think you should, you know, I'm going to refer you to a counselor and take him and see, you know, see what they say." And I said, "Okay." So we went to this counselor, and he questioned him, and he said, you know, afterwards, I said, "Well, you know, is there any way we can tell, you know, what really happened? Can you?" I said, "I don't even know if you could even um, maybe hypnotize him or whatever to get more what's going on."
Yeah.
And he said, "I'll be honest with you. He believes it's real, and no, the hypnotizing him won't change that. There's still no way to tell if it's real or if it was a dream because he believes it's real, and whatever happened, he believes is real. And his tick, the you know, the trauma is evident. So something happened that scared him. So that's all we could." And I don't
Yeah,
know
that
if
is something, the tick and because that like gave them a physical impression. So
yeah, really. So time went by. It was a few years later. We, you know, the girls would tease him and stuff, you know, about the Easter Bunny. But we, you know, we were all treating it like, okay, honey, you must have had a dream. But I believed he believed it was real or thought it, felt it was real. But we all tried to keep it lighthearted, you know. Well,
yeah, yeah.
finally, you know, the movie came out with Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And, you know, at the very end of that movie, there's
Oh
those
yes.
sweet looking little aliens. They don't look mean. They look kind.
When they
They
the door they open and they come out. Yes, of course.
Yeah,
Very very impressive scene. Yeah.
yeah. Well, we made it through the whole movie, and Josh was doing fine, but the minute he saw the fingers touching Richard Dreyfuss, you know,
Yeah.
he went crying to his room, and he said it's the Easter Bunny, and he was 8 years old by that time. And so I went after him. You know, I said, "Honey, you know," I said, "It's just a movie now." You know, he said, "No, but it's the Easter Bunny," and those fingers really set him off. And so I said, "Well, do you remember enough to draw it for mommy again? You know, because I knew you drew it long ago, but can you draw it for me again?" And then he drew a second picture, and it's 3 years later, and it's very similar to the picture he saw, you know, in those days. And it was
Yeah.
the same, you know, like peeking around the wall of the kitchen. And I had asked him
Oh,
back
peeking.
in the
Oh,
day.
that's scary. So it was peeking around the wall
It
of
was
the
peeking
kitchen.
around the wall, and it was the doorway actually where, because I had said to him before, I said, "Honey, if you were scared, why didn't you come and get mommy? Why didn't you come to me?" You know? And he said, "Because it was there. It was at the kitchen doorway." Well, it was standing in the kitchen doorway, and we had one of those ranch style homes where 3 bedrooms are on one end for the kids, and then the master's on the other end of the house, you
Yeah, you
know?
have to go across the
And so he had
house.
to go through the kitchen to get
Yeah.
to my room. So he couldn't. So he told me that. I said, "Well, so what did you do?" And he said, "I went and he went to my oldest daughter's room." She was 11 at the time. And he, you know, laid in her bed, you know, trying to be comforted, but she didn't wake up. And that's another thing. None of the other kids woke up or heard anything. None of us did. And so he was in her room, which was on the same right next to his, with the windows on the front side of the house. And he said at that time, now this 3 years had gone by, and I hadn't gotten this detail before, but he
Okay.
said that the
This is
police
good. Okay.
cars in the trees. And I said, "What do you mean, honey, police cars in the trees?" Well, he said, "The lights, you know, the police lights, the from the police cars." We had a neighbor that he got arrested for domestic violence one time. The police cars came, the lights were going, and Josh knew. You know, he knew the police cars with the lights.
Yeah.
So he was telling me, you know, he's seeing police cars in the trees with the lights, which was just another thing that just complicated this whole story that made me question what really happened, you know.
Really, that's so interesting, Susan. And
So
it's
then,
so eerie to the story of how the this being, let's call this alien, was speaking, because this is, clearly what, I don't know if you've seen the movie Communion,
yes, I
but
have.
oh, well, in Communion, one of the most impactful scenes to me is one of the aliens peeking outside of one of those. I don't know how to call it in English, but it's in Spanish. It's called a biombo. He kind of peeks out. I remember that causing such a big express, huge
Yeah.
impression, and it's you just describing the same thing.
Yeah, he tried to come to me because he had come out of his room and come into the living room to come to my bedroom, and that stopped him. Whatever he saw
Yeah, you're not
was
gonna go through that, and of course not.
blocking his way. Yeah. So he ran back the other way. Well, so then the most, I guess, the strangest thing, as far as I'm concerned, about it later was, within short time, I recognized that there was like a hard lump in my arm that I couldn't explain, but it was really bothering me. And it bothered me too. It seemed almost like it was, twitching or itching or whatever. And so after a couple of weeks of that, it was really kind of messing with me. I kind of dug it out or messed with it until I could get in a little white ball, a little white plastic. It seemed like plastic. I was able to get to come out of my arm. I still have a scar on my arm from it, but um, so
Really,
yeah, I didn't know, but I had this feeling. I know this sounds weird, but I had this feeling that it was like a tracking device, and I worried that they were going to come back and scare Josh, or what. I don't didn't know what they were doing, if they were real and coming, but I knew I didn't want it to continue to scare my kids. So I flushed that thing down the toilet, and I figured it was going to go to the city sewer and be not near our house
yeah,
anymore.
somewhere
Yeah.
far.
Them to find us again if they were visiting, because I wasn't welcoming that, to have my kids scared to death or whatever was going on. But anyway, that was that.
Oh, that's an interesting story. I mean, and yeah, I mean, I mean, just from a couple of stories that you told, you definitely have had, these experiences, and how important, just to, I mean, we have to close the show, but to sum it up, and what can you say, from living this, which, goes from dreams, goes from premonitions, from, these situations to, physically something being there within your house. I mean, can we, especially in how you're talking about the benign virus of love, how can you go beyond these situations, and grounded in spirit and grounded in God?
Well, first of all, I believe, whatever experiences we're having, there must be some reason, or even if we don't understand it, that's okay.
Yeah.
The best thing we can do is stay normal about it, do our best to, if we think of a way to help. I mean, it should seem pretty evident what to do, I guess. I don't know, but I don't have all the answers either, but I think, um, if there's some way that it could be helpful, um, maybe that's the reason for it. I don't know. But I mean, I told you, I think, about the man that I saw in my yard. It was a winter time, but it had been warm weather for a few days, and I saw a man walking through my yard, and he turned and stopped and looked right at me. And a couple days later, I saw on the news that he had been missing for a couple of weeks, and they were looking for him. So I called, the tip line and said, "Listen, I just saw that guy in my yard a couple of days ago." And they said, "Are you sure it's him?" I said, "Yeah." So they put me through a lot of questioning. How did I know him? Or, I said, "I don't know him." And they said, "Well, how did he get there?" I said, "Well, I don't know. Maybe he took the bus, maybe he drove. I don't know." But I was rushing out to go to a class when it happened, and I was running late. And I saw him, after he looked at me, he started walking toward the lake, and the ice had been starting to melt. It was warm enough that I wasn't even wearing a coat,
Hmm.
So I yelled out to him. I was in a hurry, but I said, "Wait, wait, don't go out on the lake." because that ice isn't safe anymore. I said, whoa, wait, and he didn't even stop and listen. And so I yelled out really loud in case I thought maybe he didn't hear me, but it was not that far away. And I yelled, I said, stop. I said, don't go on the ice. The ice isn't safe. And he just kept walking. And I'm like, what are you going to do? And so I ran to the class, got to the class, came home. I looked out on the lake, to see if there was nobody there. And so I didn't think much more about it. I figured, well, he, was fine, he left or
Yeah,
whatever.
whatever.
But it was 2 days later, I saw this on the news. And it was so weird because it was almost like the snapshot of him in the same coat looking right at me that was on TV as the missing
Really.
person. So there was no doubt in my mind that it was him. It was him.
And did they
And
ever find him?
well, that's the thing. I said to the police, I said, I saw this guy just 2 days ago and he was trying to walk out on the ice. Like I was trying to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. And I said, I'm kind of worried that he might have fallen through. I don't know if he's still missing. Has he showed up or what? And they said, no, he's still missing. So they sent a rescue team out to come and search the lake. And they went under the ice. There was still a little bit of ice left by that time. And they went and they couldn't find anything. And so I thought, well, at least he made it off the ice or whatever,
Yeah.
it's out there somewhere. But it turned out evidently that experience gave them the idea because he had been last seen at a bar and there was a lake right by the bar and he had left late at night at 3 when they closed the bar.
Yeah, that maybe fell into not
That
that
maybe,
place, but somewhere else.
maybe he had fallen through and that's where they found his body. And they said he
Uh,
had been dead for 2 weeks. He died that very night. And so what did I see? We don't believe in ghosts, but what did I see? Did I see,
once again, yeah.
vision of him enough to, be sure it was him, be sure it was, he was the missing person. But at the time I saw him, he looked real and I thought he was just, you know,
Definitely, definitely. That's interesting. That's so eerie. I mean, I love these stories, Susan. We have to do more, and we have to do another podcast about these stories and these experiences. But we run out of time, and we're gonna have to go. But it's been really a pleasure. It's been interesting, and thanks for coming, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. Remember to subscribe. Remember to, I mean, we don't have to even hit the remember or notice button because we're basically all weeks, every week with different shows. So you can tune in every day. And if you liked it, please tell somebody that might be interested in might something, do service to them and teach them something. So till next time, I'm Santiago Kneeland. This is The Divine Within. Take care and carpe diem. On the Divine Within podcast, we'll share real conversations to help you find a personal connection with God. My goal is to support your faith, growth, and journey toward discovering the divine within yourself. Join us to deepen your faith and spiritual journey.